Then you just want to fix it. I'll make a mistake.
Okay, are we ready? It's 5:30, shall we call the meeting to order? Thank you everyone for coming. We'll do a quick review of the agenda. We'll start with some public comments and commissioners' comments. We will review and approve only the October minutes. We did not get the September minutes in back out for us. We'll do that next month. And then we're going to go through the department strategic plan, and Captain Sherry Meisel is going to do that for us. And then we're going to talk about the body-worn cameras, and Lieutenant Dan Mateo is going to do that with us. And then Marty, I'd like to ask you to do a little update on the outreach committee, so that we'll be here tonight. And then the chief will be showing up shortly at a meeting until 5:30, and then we're going to do the report. And so we hopefully see them on time tonight. With that, I will turn over to Scott for public comments.
I do not have any public comments.
It's quick. So we'll start with commissioners' comments, and Edward, can I start with you?
Caught me with a mouthful of Milky Way.
We can start with the other Edward, though.
No. I can cook. It's good to be back. For those of you who don't know, I have some worsening health problems that may mean you don't see me as often at these meetings. But I'm here in spirit, and backing up the outreach committee with social media when the outreach committee has something to add on social media. But I hope to be getting out to 20,000, 30,000 people with whatever message we have in that regard.
Marty?
Thank you all for coming. Rich, not confident.
Edward?
I do not have any comment at this time.
Okay. Barry? Jennifer?
I am going to have to duck out of early. Yeah.
Early later.
Yeah. There's no more you all. You're fine. I have nothing else to add.
Steve?
Okay. I have a few. TRV is going to meet next Thursday at Harris Hall. We're going to be reviewing a respectful work environment complaint. And I've read all the materials, and I just say I'm looking forward to the strategic plan review. I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity to discuss the report too at some point. And again, we have a lot of material, so probably not tonight, but hopefully one of our upcoming meetings would be good to visit on that. I will say this, I hope that the command will look at incorporating many of the suggestions from the PERF report and beyond the review and promotion efforts that's in this year's strategic plan, or I guess an 18 strategic plan, and really like some of the focus on the leadership regarding transparency, communications, holding people accountable, inclusiveness, the sexual harassment concerns, and then the friction between the civilian and sworn officers. So there's a lot of good material in there, and I know that there's been work done since 2005, I think was the last one. I'd like to see this continue, some good material in there. That's all I have.
I went on an interesting ride-along Saturday before last Saturday, mostly in the River Road and Highway 99 area. It was an intense day. There was just no slack time at all, which is one thing after another. And there was one customer in particular that was very angry and behaved rather badly, and was just so invested with the topic for about half an hour. And I was really impressed with the calm and reasonable way he was dealt with it. He didn't manage to get any of the officers upset. I thought that was just great. Sure.
Police service profiles will be reviewed at the budget committee next week. I believe it's on the 15th. I just received a little note the 16th, so I'll double check that so we can get a message out if you're interested in attending that hearing. Chief brief limited to the department. You have one comment?
Yeah, I just come to have a public comment. Well, we usually do those at the beginning of the meeting, but we're usually happy to hear what you have to say when we open the public comments. Or you, if you want to speak right now. Did you fill out the form, and then once you fill that out? Okay, so if you can sit up there, you can go and sit, and then fill out the form. Make sure you do it just before. That'd be great.
Consider Patter's rain.
So you have 3 minutes.
Apologies, I want
You're
So originally, I think coming here, meeting for asking my daughter to take me sex something. And in my interactions in the public, and watching students, and I appreciate everything. I feel confident that everything, I even called that emergency member on behalf of one case that was under unconscious death, different things, and one woke up and had quite a lot of good chat, so I got it out there, and the officers have just been very compassionate but professional, and thankful that citizens stopped and kind of have lots of everything. So, but then I'm also very thankful for what the police have to do it, and the confidence from themselves, and I've also opened the door looking. So, sorry, I'm not even, I'm really excited to chief got to see any comments, and I'm really hoping that for sure the next one will have a lot of experience and training regarding sex trafficking, how to best the victims. So I didn't want to support or cooperate, but I'm not because of their real life. And that said, also good now, there's some support staff that they're trained. They're trained in sex trafficking, how to sex families, and to join with that. Lane County Against Trafficking, and I like to help remember what the organization is actually doing. We're all working very hard to help people like myself. So I want to help you for what you're doing. And I was hoping to put you through this just like you're doing my personal things. That's why I was
That was Captain Meisner, listening very carefully to what you're saying, so we'll get to the chief. Yes,
Thank you. Just want to welcome everybody, and sorry this last meeting. So anyway, let's get moving on. Let's take a look at the review and approval of October's minutes. Anybody have any changes or comments? If not, I'll take a motion.
I'll move approve.
Oh, yeah, second. Steve. Any other discussion? All those in favor of accept the minutes as presented, say aye. Those opposed? Okay, thank you.
Abstain, not present. I don't know if you're accurate or not.
So we'll move into the strategic plan review. Captain Marshall, would you like to join us at the table?
Oh, that might be possible. So, no, there's 5.
Oh, that's okay, we can move her.
Who's chair?
Oh, I didn't know, it's just that chair.
We'll work it out.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope that you all had an opportunity to see a little bit of the material that Carter has sent. And what I'd like to do is just kind of walk you through a little bit of how we got this product that we have here before us. It began approximately 2 years ago, actually, in the making at our command leadership team meetings with our other supervisors throughout the city, that's sworn and non-sworn. And we decided we wanted to start focusing on what our goals were and what the things are that were important to them and what they thought was also important to the community. So we started with keeping Eugene safe. That seems like a really important goal for a police department to have. And then building community trust. And then also having an exceptional workforce. And the theory behind that being that having an exceptional workforce means that you have employees that are happy, well-trained, well-educated, and able to perform at such a high level that will help in the other two goals. So that's kind of how we came up with those three goals and those objectives. So we started with basically a group of volunteers from the department. We met regularly, and we started having a lot of the tough discussions about taking all of that information and distilling it and trying to put it in a way that was measurable, that was impactful, and address all these things that were important to us. So as you can see, we came up with basically 9 objectives under each of the goals with a couple of different strategies, and we can walk through them. Okay. There we go. So, had the little message from the chief. A little department overview about how big our department is, what kind of population we serve, the budget that we have, and then it talks about the strategic planning committee. We also focused in on our mission, vision, and our core values. And all of those were very important. There was actually a lot of discussion. A lot of people tend to sometimes look at that and gloss through it. We spent a lot of time on that because it meant a lot to us to have a mission that was really important to all of us, sending that message of what we're here for. And the values. And I just, as a personal aside, when I first started this project, I actually went to a conference with Lieutenant Sam McGill about body cameras, and I happened to run into one of my old colleagues in Detroit. He's an assistant chief there, and I was telling him I was working on this. And I said, yeah, we've got, our mission and our values. He said, what's your core values in your department? And I told him integrity, compassion, courage. And he's like, wow, that's really great, the compassion, where did that come from? And I was so proud to tell him, because that's so unusual for a lot of police departments. I was so proud to tell him about how we came up with compassion and how important that was to us. I just say that because I want to stress that that was something that we all really felt strongly about. And I was really proud to share that with my former colleague.
I'm
sorry. That's what I can see, So we actually went through everything, spending a lot of time as appropriate to make sure that it really said what we wanted it to say. We put in our org chart, and this is the chart that we had when this process started and as it finished recently. So our first goal was keeping Eugene safe, and as we started talking about how we could have a measurable way of looking at that, we started talking about improving our response times, because that's important. And we started looking at different ways and strategies that we can help improve response times that weren't necessarily dependent upon just staffing, because that's always an easy answer. So we started talking about making sure we had policies that were aligned and establishing some benchmarking goals. Then we also looked at looking at crime prevention as a way of keeping Eugene safe and making sure that we're having the proper amount of outreach to our communities and anticipating the needs. And that was a really significant component of addressing with our non-sworn staff primarily how we can better keep Eugene safe. And so we also looked at reorganizing and implementing more efficient efforts and looking at balancing our preventative responses with our emergency responses. The second goal is building community trust. Obviously, it's such an important thing that we made it one of our top 3 goals. And so we started looking at that, and the first objective is basically starting out with an evaluation of what our current relationship is with the community and how we can strengthen our customer service. And some of the strategies that we decided upon was designing and implementing a method first and foremost for evaluating those interactions that people have with the Eugene Police Department, and that doesn't necessarily mean just an interaction based on a criminal complaint, but any kind of interaction. And then also designing a method to gather the data regarding public perception of the department. So that would be like our benchmark. And then the next objective would be, wherever that benchmark is, making sure that we're increasing that community trust. And that's really important. We need that trust so that we can actually do our job in fulfilling goal number 1, keeping Eugene safe. So some of the things that we talked about was creating an action plan that would strengthen our relationship with the community, and we'll have a working group actually that will start working on those. And then also continuing to implement our procedural justice training for all employees, because that is like a cornerstone of trust and 21st century policing. Yes?
Could you really hold our questions to the end, or
it doesn't matter if you have something.
Sure, I do.
Go ahead.
So what are those procedural justice training? Does that exist already, or do you need to develop that?
Actually, it does exist. In fact, Will Davies here has participated in training the members of our department in that, and we also have the state of Oregon is now implementing procedural justice and legitimacy training to all of the new academy students coming through. So, and we're making sure that we also get it out to all of our non-sworn staff so that they also have procedural justice and legitimacy. Here it's a focus of our external customers and our external service, but it is also an internal component as well, because we need to make sure that we're listening to each other, we're listening to our, line officers, as well as, I'm listening to the chief, not just because he's my boss, but because that's just part of that community awareness internally as well. Absolutely.
So what are those trainings like? Do all sworn officers receive it? Is there kind of a repeat they get every couple of years with refreshers?
Well, right now it is all employees, and like I said, the sworn employees that are new hires are getting it through their academy training. It's scenario-based. We try to make it specific actually to not just in general, because it's a nationwide training, but also specific to Eugene and what Eugene has gone through in the history. We just basically got everybody trained this year. We haven't developed the actual continuing education program, but that will be a component, because just like anything else, if you put it on the shelf and you don't think about it, it can get rusty. So, well, do you have anything else that might be helpful to add about the procedural justice training?
Just that my perception is that it was pretty well received and welcomed by our police department. So, and I'm looking forward to whatever further development there will be.
It's really important. It reminds, and we do a really good job, I think, already, but it also reminds officers of taking the time to really listen to people and let them voice their concerns before just taking action. So, absolutely.
Sorry, I got a good question on a lot of stuff. I know I really came prepared today. Look at now. So with the procedural justice, I mean, the metrics that you guys talked about here, percentage of employees receiving it and new employees receiving training. Is there a way to look back and say, we think we've got good training? How do we assess if the training that we have is actually working and if it's actually achieving our goal of improving relationships?
Absolutely, and that goes back to what we're going to look at the very end in terms of the metrics. And part of that, I mean, we're looking at things like surveys, and surveys not just in, hey, would you like to take a survey, but perhaps contacting people after they've had contact with EPD employees. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean just foreign officers, and it doesn't mean just in a criminal kind of context that somebody called and they had a criminal complaint. So that's one way that we can look. And the idea is we give the training, we have our baseline, we continue to train, and then we see what impact that has had in terms of how people relate or perceive their interactions with us. And the idea being that their interactions, even if they're having a bad day, is that we handled it well. And we listened to their concerns. And it may not have necessarily been a good day for them, but we didn't make it worse.
And I'm sorry, I'll move on.
No problem.
Let's make sure anybody else has any questions.
Yeah,
first,
that's fine.
Anybody else have any questions? Let's go. Then we'll get back to you.
I just wanted to ask you a question about the evaluation versus the perceptions and trust. Is this an evaluation that's designed already?
No. There are some questionnaires and evaluations and surveys that have been done. Some of them have been done by the city, and we're going to take our working group to look at that further to see what's appropriate, some of the things that we can look at historically, some of the things that we need to develop and move on. And those groups will make those recommendations.
So once a foundation is made, you've identified what it currently is, what would be a good benchmark moving into 2021, I guess.
Well, I guess that is
it maintained?
Well, I think everybody wants to improve it, and that's one of the things when we look at the metrics that, of course, we're going to want to improve. But even if the benchmark doesn't move, that gives us information and important information that says, okay, we still need to do better. And of course, if it went in the wrong direction, then that really causes something that we need to work on immediately. So I don't have all the answers yet, because that's part of phase 2.
Thank you.
I have questions for goal 1, 2, and 3. We're on 1 now, so will we do this and when we get to 2 as well?
Yeah, well, as we go through each one, we'll take a minute to stop.
All right. I appreciate it. I know there's friction when it comes to response times, and I appreciate that's the goal. And I was wondering if, as I understand that response times are measured when the officer is actually dispatched the call, right? So a person could be on hold or could have called quite some time before an officer is dispatched.
There could be different ways of measuring.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the measure and whether this goal is more of a holistic kind of view from when the call originates to when the service is addressed, or the issue is addressed.
Well, there's different ways of measuring, and one of the ways that we do look at response times is from the time the person called 911. Of course, there's some factors where somebody's still on the phone with them trying to get information. If it's one of those situations where, say, somebody is really upset and the call taker can't understand them enough to get the information to start the process of sending it to the dispatcher to have the officers start rolling. There could be a slight delay there, but generally it's when somebody's calling 911, the call taker takes it. Once it goes to the dispatcher,
then the clock is kind of running, and then depending on how much availability, where it would fall in terms of a triage. Obviously, if you're looking at something where somebody's going, oh my gosh, there's shots being fired, that's going to be a different response than somebody saying, gee, somebody, knocked over my mailbox.
So this goes more of a system approach as opposed to a component of the system. Meaning, there's different players in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's more.
So there could also be a way of looking at response times in terms of breaking it down all along the way, because that could be important factors, as well as breaking it out in terms of the different types of responses, because you're not going to necessarily measure an emergency life and death response compared to a non-emergency response. They're kind of apples and oranges.
Thank you.
We look at response times of Zoom stack, and we show them to you also. And they're divided by queue times and response times. And where we've seen the greatest increase in time is in the queue time. That's where the dispatcher's looking at the call and wishes they have a police officer to dispatch. So we have fewer officers available because the call increase. So that tends to suggest where we can
And we know that that is definitely a factor, and I think the chief, I don't know if you're going to talk about the PERF report eventually, but when we're looking at it from a strategic planning perspective, what we have within our control and wheelhouse, I have a finite number of resources, so we're trying to look at ways other than staffing increases, or how do we allocate those resources, not just necessarily giving more.
Fair enough.
Anybody else have any questions on this?
Taking mine for the end.
Okay.
The last question on this.
We'll get you to it, no?
Yeah, trying to say with the procedural justice is that, I would imagine a number of the people who the police interact with are not enthusiastic about talking to them later about how the interaction was because they went to jail. Or there's also a power dynamic element where they're afraid of speaking the truth to the police about the police for fear of retaliation, irrespective of whether or not that fear is grounded in an actual risk. So has there been any discussion about making this an anonymized process, or having a third party, or even the police auditor or some other group try to collect that data for you so that you can remove that barrier?
Actually, there's a lot of other departments that are doing something similar, and they started doing it as a way of trying to measure some of the interactions from body camera. And so some of them have had, interns or third parties. We haven't, delved into the weeds of the how yet, but there are ways of doing that without necessarily even taxing, say, the police auditor's office to RAD. Okay, goal number 3. So creating an exceptional workplace. Here we had a lot of different input on wanting to not just create a workplace and making it exceptional, like I said, for the employee's sake, but it was also because the employees recognize that if they're performing at a higher level, they're better able to serve the community. So some of these things, as we look at them, they're really about trying to increase their abilities and capacities and keep that workforce at a high functioning level. So one of the things that has become a common theme amongst not just the strategic goal, but even the PERF report and Redshift, has been about a personnel evaluation system. And I think I heard somebody talking a little bit earlier about accountability and leadership, and this is really tied into that. So one of the things that is actually the work groups are starting to form is having somebody start leading the way for the design of a new evaluation system for the employees. And there was a couple of things and components that was really important to our employees. They wanted to make sure that we also had timely reviews annually, tracking also that they had a way to provide safe feedback and a 360-degree component. One of the other objectives was to provide opportunities for all employees for career development and advancement. And some of the strategies in dealing with that was about stay interviews and providing annually. And we've actually started that process already through the city's program, and we're continuing to do that. And then also increasing awareness of work culture and developing improvement opportunities. Go ahead.
I don't understand the state interview.
Well, an exit interview is finding out why people are leaving. The stay interview is before they would leave. We want to talk to our folks and find out what keeps them here, what keeps them happy, what would help their career goals so that they don't look to leave. And it's not just monetary. Most people actually, when I did my state interviews, were more interested in other kinds of career development and advancement and being able to get additional trainings. Sometimes people have projects that they're really interested in following up on. So it's taking all of that into consideration and seeing where we can, give them not just a monetary need, but what would fulfill them intellectually and emotionally as well. And then increasing our awareness of work culture and developing improvement opportunities. So one of this is hiring a third party to conduct a work culture assessment, and actually we just had that recently. Somebody had mentioned about respectful workplace issues and accountability and leadership, and that was constant theme in PERF as well as in the Redshift. That report's not quite done yet.
A couple of questions on the first part of that. So I like the tracking, but I also like, I'm hoping that you have benchmarks that you're measuring too.
Mm-hmm.
So because it was great, but now what are we going to do with them, right? And what happens if we're not hitting kind of like within those benchmarks? How are we going to correct that? And there should be an accountability piece in there. I guess I'm kind of inquiring that there will be some of those things built into this.
Yes, and on the last page we have the page about the metrics. But as you notice, under each one of the strategies, the bullets, a lot of them we're tracking the percentage, and that's part of that accountability. And as we're tracking, if we find that our percentages are dipping or we're not fulfilling, what we said we're going to do, then that's a way for the department to hold us in leadership accountable for not making sure that these things are done.
So you'll define what you believe is success, though, right? And then tracking to that measure.
Yes, and success, there's in my mind, two different types of success. This is all the implementation thing, and then the other part of success is once we have successfully started to implement, then start looking at where we are and then where we need to go, moving that dial, so to speak.
Then one more question on about the advancement part. So, and it's really like the PERF report kind of touches on this in a material way, and I was wondering if you'll incorporate some of those PERF findings in terms of assessment regarding the selection process and maybe adjustments to the testing. There was an issue regarding the testing and the numerical score as opposed to some other way to enrich the pool.
Absolutely. It's we have this document that was internally developed amongst our employees, really, and not just the working group, but we took it back to command leadership training, let people see it, let them have input. We took them to in-service training so that encompasses the entire department. We made sure we also took them to the in-service trainings that the non-sworn component of our department we're at, so that they would have input, brought that back, try to make sure that we listen and that we practice procedural justice and legitimacy and incorporated that. But then when you look at the PERF report and the surveys and the interviews that they did, a lot of the themes are the same. And the same thing with our cultural assessment done by Redshift. A lot of the themes are the same and have overlapped. And so what we're doing now is trying to really consolidate where all of the things are overlapping so that we don't have 3 different groups working on the exact same thing. But it's really kind of interesting. In my mind, it's validating that we are on the right track because 3 independent ways of looking at this has come up with essentially the same themes all the way across. So we know what the folks are telling us. We are hearing them.
If I can add one more question. On the transparent process on the next page, so it says process for employees to provide feedback, recommendations, and track. Is there a share component? A part of the transparency is kind of sharing that back with the employees.
Yes.
You're like sharing kind of the results that you track.
Oh, absolutely. It's sharing the results. In this particular part, I think this had to do more with a lot of employees have great ideas and they want to make recommendations. And they may say something to somebody, they may send an email, they may put it on paper, but there's been no formal tracking process. And sometimes things will go up the chain and then they never hear anything, we haven't closed the loop. And so that, and sometimes people don't understand why a certain decision was made. And so we want to make sure that we develop a process so that it's very clear. If something comes up, a request or a recommendation or an idea, that we look at it, we think about it, we talk about it, we research it, do whatever we have to do. But once a decision is made, not only does that decision get pushed out, but the reason behind it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
So, and then providing consistent and fair employee discipline, it goes back to a lot of that accountability aspect and making sure that we're transparent about what the playing field is so nobody feels that somebody is getting treated unfairly or that they're being treated unfairly. And then the last one was building a workforce that reflects the demographics of our community. So that's very important for a number of reasons, including legitimacy and making sure that people don't feel like we're an occupying force, as it were. So, and I think that just helps bring a lot of diversity into the department with a lot of different perspectives.
Good question on that. Our community is not a particularly diverse community. I would suspect, though, that the community our law enforcement officers interact has more of the diverse facets of the community than the overall population. Is that accurate?
I don't know if I would say that that's accurate or not. I know that we've got some professional stops data that's going to be serving that will help maybe eliminate that. But I do know that actually in some ways we're fairly close demographics in terms of race to the community. In some ways we can improve, but that also would include, women, which tends to be a very underrepresented population in law enforcement, at least in the sworn ranks. So that there's different ways of looking at the demographics other than just race. And we want to make sure that we're as inclusive in our department to reflect those that we serve. So, and then the last part is about the impact metrics. So we're looking at one of the ways to keep the 30,000 level look at keeping Eugene safe is looking, once we start implementing all of our strategies, looking at the total crime rates per 1,000 residents and seeing if that needle is moving in the right direction after we've implemented some of our objectives and strategies. Looking at how many public initiated calls for service, because that's another way to look. And then our response times for priority, the top 3 priority calls. Building community trust, a lot of it is going to be based on surveys that look at overall trust satisfaction from our victims or survivors of crimes, and then also looking at overall trust satisfaction scores from our suspects, because that's just as important. And then also looking at just from a general community, because like I said, not all interactions with the police are criminal in nature. So we don't want to neglect that segment. And then creating the exceptional workplace, we're looking at our annual employee retention rates, the number of hours that we're working overtime due to drafts, meaning that we have a shortage or a gap to fill, and nobody wants to work the overtime, so you end up drafting the lowest seniority person. Doesn't necessarily mean that overtime is bad to have, or that, every department, even fully staffed ones, will end up with overtime. But when you have to draft, that can have a demoralizing effect. So we want to see how we're doing there. And then the last one would be the number of hours of outside training per employee quarterly to make sure that we're fulfilling that career development opportunity. So those are the minimum that we're going to look at in terms of the impact metrics at the higher level. So, I was going to say, now that was the plan, and then our next steps is about the implementation team. So we've identified the 9 objectives to achieve our desired goals. Within each objective are different strategies that our strategic planning committee has developed. And then what we want to do is we have a tentative timeline associated with each objective, because this is a 5-year plan. We can't do everything all at once, unfortunately. And so there's going to be opportunities for involvement at every level of the organization for members of the department to be involved in implementing that plan, so everyone can partake and have ownership in the direction of where we're going and achieving these goals. So these are the different objectives, and then underneath are the strategies and kind of a timeline. Some of them we still have to determine, and we are sharing this. We've shared this with the entire department, and we're looking for folks to become involved in the different strategies and objectives. And so we're going through, and those are the groups that are going to be actually working on the details and then let them bolt developing how we're going to implement this. Carter, who can't be here today, is actually going to be organizing and tracking to make sure that we are staying on track with regular reporting, because what we don't want to have happen, and this is one of the biggest concerns with our employees, is they don't want to see this ending up on a shelf, and we're not going to let that happen. And we're going to make sure that they know that that's not happening, because they're going to have those regular reports. So that's where we are today.
So let's start a cue from Steve. Have you?
So listening to overtime and draft, I'm curious that if you were to, this is what I suspect, or my suspicion anyways, if you were to add up the sum total spent on overtime expenses, they hiring like another employee or an officer would be far less than what you spend on overtime and of current employees. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Okay.
That would be something that our finance person would have to address. And sometimes it's not a matter of just the finances. I mean, we're hiring as fast as we can. But sometimes there's other kinds of overtime that we have, the staffing, because somebody's sick, there's a minimum number, sometimes there's a crime thing that occurred and we need an extra body. So there's different reasons for that, so it's not just about hiring.
Claire, and then
Well, I think this is a good plan. I mean, you know, it's been on a lot of different directions, and you guys are really hitting some of the important points, at least I think, for you internally. So just a couple of questions. What, do you have an idea of how you're gonna approach the piece about setting standards, setting a standardization for discipline?
I know that there's different ideas, but there will be a working group, and we'll probably have some of our folks that are involved in the internal professional standards division working with that group, but I don't have anything specific at this time.
So in terms of just creating uniformity or a standardization process, would you be looking to the city HR department?
We already work closely with them, and yes, we'll make sure that whatever we do is on their radar as well.
And then I also, under the recruitment piece, I just want to appreciate the fact that it was thought to include looking at attrition for underrepresented communities, because that's often a neglected part of these efforts: recruitment, training, hiring, and then you're on your own, have fun, and often unsuccessful depending on the culture and how prepared folks are to be welcoming. So I think that's a really important piece. And then I'm just curious what you guys are thinking about in terms of trying to keep this going forward once the new chief is brought on board.
Well, I know that a lot of folks have said that, especially with the timing that we finally got it completed. But really, everything in this plan, if I say, sir, with respect, it's developed with the 21st century policing concepts and pillars in mind, and I would be extremely surprised if this would be veering way off course of what our next chief will be. I think the 21st century policing concepts are going to continue to move, this department's going to continue to move forward in that direction. I think Chief Kearns has given us a very good foundation, allowing us to develop this with our employees, and a new chief may adjust it or tweak it, but I would be surprised if it goes completely off course.
And I apologize for being late, so I missed a little bit of the preamble, but do you feel like folks in the department have some ownership over this plan at this point?
Yes, I do.
I think that'll make a difference too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
so I have Timothy up next and Martin Scott.
About ownership of the plan, yes. And I think if you've got buy-in by all of the participants right up to the point where a new chief looks at it, it would be hard for a new chief to steer that buy-in away to some completely different thing. Because I work often in politics, I have to look sometimes at this through a political lens. And building community trust doesn't just make for better policing, it doesn't just make for better police-community relations. It increases the possibility that the next time the city asks the taxpayers for money from our homicide detectives, the answer might be a yes. So building community trust is not just internal to the department, it's also very, very important for all of us for our safety, in terms of what people are willing to pay for our safety. Sad but true that it works that way, but it works that way. I've worked with fire departments in major cities, and often there is very little communication between fire suppression and fire prevention. Fire suppression goes out with the lights and sirens and puts the fires out, and fire prevention goes on with fire inspections, the fire marshals, and so on. Not only do they not talk to each other much, but I'm sure somebody somewhere is doing this by now, but I'm not seeing much study, data collection. is the money we're spending on prevention actually moving the needle on suppression? Now, fire departments give a great deal more in terms of resources and power to their prevention people. So when they see a problem that is going to lead to a fire, they have an ability to act. Our crime prevention people don't have that power. But I'm thinking as we look at our planning that Eugene might want to think about giving its prevention people not more power, but more resources, more budget, and looking at them more in that duality of prevention and suppression, and less this office over here with some different uniforms, and they go out and do speeches. They do great work, but like most departments, that's not where, say, doesn't come in subject. Council might want to see the budget money spent there as opposed to increasing response times or patrol units or something. So just a thought going forward in this is more on prevention. I said this in my first or second commission meeting several years ago, and I'll keep saying this, I'm almost on my knees. Please stop referring to it as customer service. We're not customers. And where that model breaks down is that Starbucks has customers. Those customers don't vote on how much money Starbucks gets per budget in their departments. That's a big difference. Police departments' customers are taxpayers and citizens. So I really encourage you to get away from the customer service thought and think more about the fact that, come right down to it, these are the people who are going to vote taxes, who have expectations, they're going to vote politicians into office who are going to make decisions about, and so on. So I would please lose that word and think of something else. Citizen service, community service, something of that nature. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is when you get to polling, there's a tendency by city government to overlook the possibilities in social media. Partly because if you don't manage polls properly, what you get is a lot of invective, which isn't that helpful. But there are good polling tools for social media. There are existing sites here in Eugene and Wayne County that focus on public safety. And it's open-ended. People can write in some additional comment, but you've got a way to reach, again, 20, 30, 40,000 people in a couple of weeks and ask them blank. So let's keep thinking about that as well. Not least because when you ask people what their opinion is, whether you do exactly what they wanted to do or not, they feel more a part of the process. They feel that they bought into it a little bit because they were asked, even if it didn't, if their vote didn't turn out the way it was, at least they had a chance to say something. I'm done. Thank you.
I have a couple of quick comments. I didn't see it in the strategic plan, but I hope it hasn't fallen by the wayside of having an active reserve program. Because I think a lot of the things we talk about in terms of having a good workplace, especially to our parents, frankly, is the ability to go part-time and back to full-time. And it's a hard investment to make, but it has certain capacity. It's really nice. And it also helps you with coaching if they operate independently, which together is beneficial. The second thing I would say is, in the reserves, in the military, active duty always tells waiting to be status discipline or cops and robbers briefs, which is people who've done bad things. What happened to them, usually anonymized. We always say, like, police department, look, we're too small. If we say this happened, everybody knows who it is. It's not really obvious anymore. So if there is some ability to have some guys who communicate with other departments and say, hey, these are the offenses that have gone on, anonymized, and this is the sort of price people are paying in terms of their career. So I think it's useful. One is sort of a preventive thing in terms of, hey, look, I get in trouble with that. But also, hey, this is a big deal. Do you care about this? So there's some way of getting that information. I realize every police department is happy to share their words and all, but there's some database.
That's actually a good suggestion. The state has an ethics bulletin that it puts out monthly that describes the decertifications that have occurred in the previous month. And then, of course, our CRB, public reviews, internal affairs cases.
Well, I will tell you, the bar rag, right, is one of the most popular section. Just hope it's not too close to something.
Scott, Edward,
Thanks. The building community trust in the surveys is going back to that things that we're going to a place where we're collecting data and making more data-driven decisions. So I guess you have to think about protecting your data from corruption, and I can get through questions that don't give you the full answers the way you're really looking for. So sample size is other things that you're making decisions based on, just not a small sample unit, and it's taking you somewhere it's not the correct direction. I know many of our universities and schools in the area are always looking for projects, stats classes, others who might be happy to help. We're trying to do that internally. That can be difficult.
I was thinking we'll need that, and I know actually we're really lucky with Jeremy and our other crime analyst teams that they're very familiar with the technical requirements, and so I'm sure they will be consulted as to some of that, and that's something that we would consider. It hasn't been completely, like I said, flushed out. There's a couple of different things that
And I really love the goal 3, the exceptional workforce. I think when you look at employee engagement, the United States is fairly low, and we spend all this time attracting, recruiting, training employees, officers in this case, and then not to retain them, it's an expensive journey of people, and it's so important. And I think when you do it the right way, and you've outlined a lot of great things here through surveys, other things, goals 1 and 2 are impacted. I think that's the unfortunate thing is that if you don't do number 3 right, then it goes to the back seat. And so I really like what you have. Right?
We emphasize it's not just the officers. We have a lot of really talented non-sworn folks that we've recruited, that we've brought on board, that we want to keep. And we have a lot of talent there that we can't let go through. So it's all of our employees.
Thank you, Jim.
So I help facilitate the strategic planning committee, which their names are in there. They did the heavy lifting. They really did.
Thank you.
We have Edward, and then
I don't have any questions. So first of all, thank you so much for the presentation, for engaging us and helping highlight the questions. You got, I think that was really important. I don't think we've had the opportunity to done the Human Rights Commission liaison to the commission, and I'm actually the chair of the Human Rights Commission. So if you sense the sense to the questions that I have, there's a reason for it, beyond my own personal belief. I think you'll see that represented here in my comments. So I wanted to first of all, I really appreciate the focus on trust and relationship in the community that has played out through this, and also commitment to the employees. From the Human Rights Commission standpoint, we focus a lot on how do we create a welcoming, open environment in our community, but we've also said that it's important that we have a government that does that and for their employees as well. And so seeing that well represented in this report, I mean, that you can tell there's a lot of time and effort, and I think you guys have really thoughtful discussions by the sort of these products together. So I want to thank you for that. I also just want to encourage that as you're embarking, especially on that trust building and community relationship assessment, is really trying to take a nuanced approach to the information that you guys get. It's very easy for probably a large majority of the community to agree about the relationship with the police. I have a very good relationship with the police. I've had a few encounters, most of my fault. Apparently everyone has that on me. And I had a very positive interaction. And you can tell that this is a department that wants to get it right at every community they serve, not just the holistic, because otherwise you wouldn't want to interview suspects and see how they felt about their interaction with the police, which is, I think, a novel concept. And one that is, I think, really thoughtful. But as you're looking at that broader picture community, there are parts of our training that we at the HRC have heard that they feel left out by the police. That when the police are called on them, the police are there at the moment, and when they call for the police, no one comes. And, there's oftentimes a racial element to that, or a language-based element to that. And so a broader section of our community will likely demonstrate a positive result, but if they miss really key segments of our community, who are also at times the most vulnerable, particularly immigrants, low-income individuals, and the unhoused who are oftentimes victims and feel they have the least power to affect change. And so as you were looking at those elements, whatever you guys can do to try to find really nuanced approaches to that data and figure out not just holistic communities, but unique communities as well, I think would really be an awesome and powerful statement for listeners as invested as they are in the community. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and we'll probably be calling you when it comes to dealing with some of those nuances. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Myself, thank you. I want to say that I really appreciate the work that was on this, and maybe it's because these are a lot of topics that we have talked about at the commission or have on our work plan that I really like this planning process and what you're focusing on. Sort of keeps in line with, I think, what we're here to the community, the direction that they want you to start measuring service, and doing a great job on this. And then one other comment is, I don't often disagree with Edward, but I do think you need to continue to use customer service. The people are out there, and I think it's a mindset that if the officers are out there, and these are people that they need to take care of, that customers, that it leaves a better view.
I'll let you two back.
So good. Any other questions for Captain?
Well, thank you very much for taking the time and listening to me and looking at the plan.
We are doing great for time. And so now we ask Lieutenant Miguel to join us at the table to talk about body-worn camera update.
Yeah, real quickly, Lieutenant Sandra Gill has been with the Eugene Police Department for over 26 years, and she's been in quite a number of assignments, including patrol, investigations, and more recently in operations support. In operations support, she's in charge of the Animal Welfare Office, the Crime Analysis Unit. She helps with hiring and backgrounds and police facilities and our safety. And there's probably some other things I haven't mentioned. If we want something done well and on time, we have Lieutenant Sandra Gill there. She's pretty capable individual. She's also one of the leads on the body-worn camera purchase, development, rollout. And pretty soon, in the new year, she's going to be transferring to professional standards, where she'll be in charge of training in policy and internal affairs.
So Carter asked me to come and give you guys an update, and I said, well, what do they want to know? So she shot me a bunch of questions on things that she thought you would ask. So I put them into a little bit of a PowerPoint here. But anything else that comes to mind as we go through, feel free to ask. A lot of the PowerPoint I cut and pasted the training that was presented to officers because you'll see the pieces of it are our policy. So I'm assuming that you guys in the past have had a chance to review the policy when we're coming forward with body-worn cameras. So I won't read it every slide word for word, since you guys have seen it before. So who is wearing body-worn cameras? Basically all sworn officers in the patrol division, so sergeants, officers, and lieutenants. We also have our animal welfare officers wearing body-worn cameras, even though they're not sworn. They think that there's enforcement action. People are just as passionate about their animals as they are about their property and their family members. So they're the only non-sworn folks that are wearing them. And then we have a pool of spare cameras that are available for detectives. Detectives aren't expected to wear them on their, civilian attire throughout the course of the day, but they have them available. So if they're going to go out on a search warrant, or they're going to go out and contact someone just that they want to interview, they'll take one, they'll check one out and take it with them. If you have non-uniformed person like myself, and I'm going to go work patrol for a night, I would check my out and whether I check. Other than that, I don't. So let's be reporting. Basically, when the policy was developed, we took everything that we were required to record with our in-car video system, which we already had in place for a year, and we added C, what highlighted in red there. Investigative encounters with suspects, victims, witnesses, or complainants. So in addition to traffic stops, bike stops, situations where you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause, we added investigative encounters. And we were a little worried at first because we thought, do we really want them to record every cold step that they go on, or a big burglary and some of the stuff that you're not really going to get much evidentiary value out of it. You know, if you're interviewing a complainant or a witness or whatever. So we went ahead with this in the policy, knowing that we would also look at the amount of data that we're storing, because it's quite expensive to store that information. In most investigative encounters, if there's no arrest or no citation issues, they get deleted either 190 days or a year, depending on how they're coded. So, and we thought we would get pushback from the officers about having to record all those cold calls, and we really haven't gotten any, and it seems to be working well. We're at like 14 terabytes of storage right now and fully operational since July 1st with our video system. And we're just about to hit the 6-month mark, so we'll start seeing some of the videos fall off. So our storage should stabilize pretty soon. So we're going to leave that in there. We don't really have any intention of changing it at this point. But that was one of the things we thought, well, maybe we can cut back on the full incident. Privacy and advisement of recording. Officers are required to advise people that they're being recorded. You know, if they pull up on an active fight or something and they have to act really fast, you know, you don't have it against them if they don't advise right away. But they should be advising as soon as they get a chance. They don't have to advise at public meetings or rallies, providing, you know, they have the camera in place. So, when can they turn the camera off? Basically, if they're in an extended situation, so they're on an accident scene and they're just going to be directing traffic for a while, they can turn it off. If they're driving to the jail and they have the in-car system on, they can turn off the body worn because they have another device that's recording. When they get to the jail and they get inside the booking area where the deputies take control of the person, they can turn it off there because that's recorded. Basically, other than that, we want them to be recording from the start of the incident to the end of the incident. Sensitive interviews and investigations. We put this language in there because we wanted officers to be able to cover up the lens if they felt it was necessary. Pretty much for people's privacy. If they're doing an interview of, you know, an assault victim at the hospital and they're in a compromising position, there's no need to record that visually, so they can cover up the lens and just record audibly if they want. Same thing as, you know, with they went to someone's house on a burglary and the person goes, I really don't want you recording the entire inside of my house. The officers can cover up the lens. And then they can record the audio so they have it for their notes and all of that. So, for the most part, body-worn camera footage is exempt from disclosure by the public, unless the public interest requires disclosure in a particular incident. So you have to have, there has to be a really good reason to release the video to the public. This has a lot of words on here. But if it's determined that a video needs to be released to the public, basically we have to redact it. So we have to blur out all the faces, some of the audio, and things like that. Yes, it is. It's public record law.
One question, CNX collector, 2.6. Are we soliciting waivers? We don't care if it's blurred out. It takes so much time. I have a call.
You know, we do with the officers, you know, they'll ask the officers to care if your face is blurred out, and some of the officers don't care. But, you know, we've only had one video released since we've been up and running with our cameras. Because if it's requested by a defense attorney or someone who's out on vacation or something, they can access it and it's not fully redacted. But if it's requested by public or media, it has to be redacted. But we've only had one since July.
So that's the number you released. How many requests have been high? Because they're typically that.
That I don't know, but there have not been very many. Unfortunately, I don't know the number. So, basically, when a request is made by the public for media for footage, our record supervisor is going to calculate how much time it's going to take to redact the video. Because it's quite an extensive process, going frame by frame by frame and blacking from out or blurring faces. It takes quite a bit of time. So she provided me with these numbers. So I guess take forward. And so she got a 15-minute video with individual face blur, about 30 minutes of video, or would take about 30 minutes of time to redact. And at about the cost of $42. If it was a full time blur, about 60 minutes, so it'd be about $65. And these are just estimates, like I said, we haven't had a lot that we've had to release. A 40-minute video, if there's numerous people in it, 8, 10, 12 people, it could, you know, take 20 hours and $30. So the discovery requests are a little bit different than public requests. The defense attorneys and defendants, the video footage, when we have a case that goes to the city prosecutor or the DA's office, they get, once they file the case, they'll send us an email saying they need the evidence, and we actually send it to them in evidence.com. So all of our footage is stored on the cloud in evidence.com. And then the city prosecutor and the DA's office have evidence.com. They have the prosecutor platform, so we can share videos directly with them through that system. And then they provide them to the defense. And the defendant gets things back at the case where there is no defense attorney. And they have to charge the defense $25 per case. But again, they don't have to do the redaction. Yeah.
Lieutenant, how much of the recording do you send? Do you set up just the incident, or do you have to set up like a whole day's recording?
We'll send just that incident. So from the time the officer first turned on their camera at that particular incident until it shuts off at the end. And sometimes there will be 3 or 4 officers' videos they can set in a package. And the system allows us to send case files, so you can connect cases and people as well. And so, you know, they may get an hour-long video and really only 10 minutes is of value to the case. But you can also go into the system and bookmark stuff. And it's a makes a copy, and then the DA can bookmark it so it's easy to find one of those bookmarks.
I asked that because I remember one of the comments from DAs when we started to talk about these was that they would have to review hours worth of body cam videos. And so that's why I asked that question. So it sounds like really we're just sending to them what the incident is. They don't get like the whole day's officers.
Right. They just get that incident. And an officer can flag timestamp things in their video. So if I read someone Miranda rights at such and such time, I can timestamp it when I first walk up on the car and timestamp it, so it's easier for the prosecutors to locate everything.
I do. Maybe there's another level of regulations, administrative regulations behind this that would prevent this from happening. But I'm sure you're aware of the Seattle incident. And once they started their badge cam program, some clever citizen made an FOI request for all video footage of everything. Now, that would be financially prohibitive, unless, of course, there's some crazy millionaire. But other than that, I'm not seeing something here that prevents one person from doing that.
Well, in 2015, the House Bill, I think it was 2571, where they outlined basically the body-worn camera protocol for the state of Oregon, and that's when they went into the public records laws, and they made these exempt public records, so they were ahead of the game on it.
Because obviously, what that person would have obtained would have been the footage of the insides of everyone's homes and cars who were not themselves criminals, and would have been the caller, that might have been the witness, that would have been the next door neighbor. So it was a horrendous case.
Yeah.
Just happy to hear that we're ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of states that did not get ahead of it in our
Hands and Crocs, yeah. Thank you.
And, you know, I called one of our city attorneys, Ben Miller, and I asked him, I said, so what prevents the defense attorney from releasing this and giving it to their clients who may give it to anybody or post it on Facebook? And I said, do they have to follow the same public records law that we do? And he said, not really. It's more of an ethical obligation on their part not to release it because it's, you know, part of the case and whatnot. And we haven't had any problems with that either. The future of body-worn cameras, I don't think they're going away. Our officers love them. They're really helpful for us in a lot of ways. We are in the process of integrating our CAD system with evidence.com. So when an officer checks out on a call, that incident number is already in the CAD system, automatically auto-populates into evidence.com. Right now, when an officer does that, they go on a call, they take a video, they log into evidence.com on their smartphone, and they type in the case number, and they put the incident in a category, you know, whether it was an arrest or an investigation, and that determines how long it's held in the system. So they have to do all that manually right now, and it's just a minute or two of work after every call that we're going to be integrating that system. We just met today because we decided that once we got up and running for 6 months, we were going to evaluate the policy and see if we need to make any changes. And we're really going to be making a couple of really minor changes. We're going to continue tracking internal affairs data to identify issues and changes in the number of citizen-generated complaints and report incidents. When we first applied for the grant, we had set up those are good things we're going to monitor. So we got our first quarter's information back, and it doesn't look like it's had a dramatic effect at all. But again, it's only 3 months worth of full data. So we'll keep monitoring that, and we have to report back to the grant agency every quarter until the end of June.
You want to wait to the end? Okay.
That's really about it. The next phase is our in-car video system. We're probably going to be going to the same camera system and the same evidence storage system that we have now. Right now, our in-car system is one company, and body cameras are another, and we're going to be switching over.
Thank you. So I'll start with you and Marty. Go ahead, Marty.
So, quick question. The workload on the officers, we talked about integrating into the past. Is that really the only thing you have to do right now? Like, with that, I guess I'm a little concerned. These are a great tool. It's just add costs to work with.
Right.
So, going to streamline it now.
Yeah, the integrating is going to streamline it quite a bit. Other than that, there's not much to these cameras because at the end of their shift, they just put them in a dock and then they're uploaded. and they're charged overnight. Not over.
And then the second one is flashing back to 20 years ago or so, and there was an article in Register Guard about perhaps sabotage of the in-car cameras. I haven't had a sense that this would take time and research, but you have an observation about that?
No, there's absolutely no resistance to this. Officers love having cameras. And yeah, and I was here when, you know, the very first in-car video system came out. And it was different though. I mean, now everybody's using their camera all the time. Things have just changed technology-wise. And our younger cops, you know, they're very technologically savvy, and they don't mind.
So, Edward Evans,
So you just now referenced there hasn't been much of an impact with use of force and hiding investigations. Does that mean that there hasn't been much of an impact on the number of complaints, or hasn't changed the force of the county?
There hasn't been a significant change in the numbers. So the third quarter from 2016, which would be July through September, we had 49 citizen complaints. This year, the third quarter, we have our cameras in place. We have 50. Not much the same, one complaint. What it does do is it makes it a lot easier, and I don't want to speak for the auditor's office, but for sergeants, if someone calls and says, hey, that officer was rude to me and they did X, Y, and Z, it's really easy to go watch the video so you can confirm or deny that it happened and then address the issue. I mean, you know,
Is there any kind of tracking or auditing, you report that an officer reports for making a stop or something like that? Is there any kind of going back and checking to make sure they have been turning the body cameras on and seeing there's kind of a verification rate and we are achieving our goal of actually on the ultimate compliance with the policy, or is it really just a complaint driven process?
For the most part, it's complaint driven, except the expectations we have of our sergeants that they're monitoring them, their employees. So the sergeants can look at them for, you know, when they do their evaluations, look for, you know, good things, bad things. But it's my belief that they're turning them on. They want these cameras. They are great evidence. They protect them from, you know, false allegations and, you know, something goes really wrong. After.
One final question.
I didn't mention this in the presentation, but I did talk to Cindy Coleman at Internal Affairs, and we have not had any incidents where a complaint has come in, and we had, you know, 50 allegations in 3 months, or inquiries that came in, and not one of those, when they went to review the incident, did not have footage was required.
So that's kind of much. I worked for LTD in North Carolina, and our public safety officers have been wearing body-worn cameras for a while. What they found while wearing them was actually helped in de-escalate situations on a somewhat regular basis when they want to, that they're on reporting. Who had any similar reports from your store?
Not my house, and I think everybody's probably has a better behavior when they're being recorded. Unless, you know, you're having some severe mental health issues or you're under the influence, then your behavior probably doesn't change that much. But the average citizen who's, you know, just having contact with the police, they probably
got a question from calls from the members?
Yeah, I've tracked the introduction of body-worn cameras in a number of departments over the years, and of course I read best practices and reports on how this is going weekly. And what I noticed is in some of the larger cities, LA, Chicago, New York, and so on, the resistance to the body cameras went hand in hand with a culture within the department and really within the union that said it's not the citizens' goddamn business what we're doing. I don't get that impression from EPD or its officers. And what I have watched is that even in some of these cities where the resistance is sort of institutional, cultural, at the individual officer level, there is a gradual awareness, as you say, that it settles a lot of he said, she said, the officer said it happened this way, the citizen said it happened this way, oh look, here's the video. And suddenly that video is a friend to an officer who didn't like it before. But in LA, it's true that when they rolled out the first wave of body cams, they worked by transmitting a signal from the body cam to a device inside the patrol car using a little antenna. And in the first month, the vast majority of these were mysteriously broken off in the line of duty. And still, in these resistant departments, what changes is that it reduces the number of false complaints drastically, which saves the departments and the cities and the taxpayers in those cities money, time, and effort. So I'm really happy we're using this here. I'm impressed to see that, well, only one person has wanted a copy of this other than an attorney, because there are the cities where people would just be grabbing this information for whatever they could use it for. I couldn't see Eugene isn't much like that. The last thing I think I'd want to say is that how close are we to getting these on all of our field officers?
They are on all of our field officers. So, only people that aren't wearing them are as administrative folks like myself who are in the office all day, and then detectives aren't expected to wear them all the time. They are expected to wear them. They don't. They know they're going to go to a search or a search warrant, then they have a shared rules that they can check out. But all of our patrol folks, motor officers, canines,
One last thing. You mentioned that you weren't having them turned on while officers are directing traffic. You might want to consider keeping those in a short retention loop. That may be where you get the license number of the truck to hit.
Well, and what we have too is a 30-second pre-record. So once I turn because it's continually recording, once you turn it on, it actually holds the 30 seconds of video prior to turning it on.
Interesting. But anyway, just that thought, take a look at the dash cam.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions? Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
So we're moving right along. We're ahead of schedule. Let's get out early tonight. Marty, can I ask you to give us a little update on the outreach committee?
Only if you don't make me take the full 15 minutes. Yeah, we had a meeting. I was the only one who came other than Carter and some people from the public comment, which was interesting, of course. But I think they found it a little unsatisfying, so I'll have an audience of one. So my suggestion is meetings, we all have limited time in our budget for meetings. There seemed to be some consensus around the idea that we would make a list of the organizations we thought we should check in with. Probably on an annual basis, more if they want it, but to get out and show the flag. There seemed to be a consensus around the idea that this was for listening. That if we were going to say anything, it would just be to describe what the police commission does. So we're not taking complaints about officer friendly. We're here to say, hey, look, are there some policy issues that you think we should work on? And then we would take their questions back and we could get answers in a more deliberate way. So we didn't want to be individually speaking for the whole police commission and give that impression. And then so we wanted to do so that's our group outreach effort, and then we also thought an online outreach effort would be useful. So that would, hopefully minimize the number of organizational meetings we have to do. My suggestion going forward would be, there was a list that Carter generated that I think we can share next time, and perhaps we just go once around the table and each pick one we want to do, and then once you go, we'll listen, and then we'll report back in commissioner comment time or however we want to do it. Just bring the feedback back, and then we can figure out how we want to respond if there are substantive issues that are brought up. So that seemed to be the least time-intensive way of getting where we wanted to go, and also engaging more with the community. This is a big goal that we share. So that's my suggestion going forward. If people have other ideas, that's fine, but you have to come to the meeting to have them.
To participate in the outreach team or committee, subcommittee could also work with Goal 2 on the non-direct interaction with the police force and perceptions and trust, especially people that are interactions right with the police. Just general public comments. I think that would be a great tool. It's non-threatening to citizen members to gather information.
I'd be happy to do that. I'm always happy to go out and chat with you. Why don't I talk to Carter and have something for the next meeting or something?
Any updates? So then we'll move to the chief report.
All right. So these are the activities that we involved in. We had Lone Arm Barricaded Summit. This is a department community member 2 meetings where we went over our policy, developed some priorities, and we're moving forward with it. Now we'll bring that policy here so you have a chance to look at what we've done. End of the CRB. This is pretty helpful for me, and I'd recommend it. I really recommend it because next permanent chief. Hearing the conversation that the CRB has is pretty valuable. I'm thinking about how I communicate cases and consider the evidence. In this particular case, the board made a couple of observations that hadn't stood out for me. The amount of time, for example, that the officer was on scene before they used force, and the force that was evaluated, and other things that escape me right now. But the conversation in the CRB meetings, if you haven't attended one, is pretty valuable, I think. I have one-on-one interviews with the final police officer candidates. It's a practice that we started a year or so ago. It's nice to have that connection with people that are going to be working here. It's nice for me to hear a little bit about their life, what they think is important about being a police officer, and what values that they bring to the job. Serenity Lane has an annual awards breakfast, so people that contribute to making folks' lives better are honored there. Sergeant Larry Crompton was one of them this year. We had a command leadership team training day. I presented on the PERF report to the media, and I'm happy to do that here. I've got a presentation that I've done at in-service this month. So if you'd like, I can do that next month. Made those presentations in in-service. And then Oregon Peace Officers Association has an annual award banquet. Went to that last Friday night, and quite a number of our employees Fairlock Acts for outstanding work that they've done. These are a few items that were in the news. There's an unknown death investigation of a woman in an alley downtown. There's a possibility that it's a suicide from one of the parking structures. Some bicycle crashes. I heard one on my way in today. Fatal motorcycle crash on the Ferry Street Bridge is unusual. The crime prevention team noticed an increase in bicycle thefts that are sort of outside the normal seasonal increases, so they did some theft prevention stuff. They're also working to promoting bicycle registration. Mandatory bicycle registration.
Put it on the list.
Yeah, we'll put it right next to fireworks.
And dogs downtown.
Because we don't have enough comfort. And we're working on a homicide near the tracks under an overpass. Chief recruitment process is moving along. I don't think the brochure has been posted yet, but they're dangerously close to doing that. we're debriefing the downtown and the parks operations from this last spring and summer. We'll be making a presentation to the council. I think that's on the agenda. I don't know which it is exactly. First recommendations I can bring to you. And we'll continue our work on community justice system assessment. These are the policies that we finalized this last year. Five lines here. But I think most of it is just cleanup language, just for the policies that we have. Nothing on there really stands out. And this is our monthly daily policing report. This map changes very little from month to month. Those are the public initiated calls for service.
We don't want to hear that it doesn't change.
No, I mean ratio.
Liquor license. Liquor license.
It doesn't change. It's concentrated in most of the activity of and so we saw the same idea of activity. So this is a chart that we look at every month. It shows steady increase in public initiated calls for service. That's the lower right graph. And a similar decline in calls for service. The numbers that are kind of interesting here are that 36 months ago, over the last 36 months, we have 54 more calls for service every day than we did. So that's the increase. We have 36 fewer officers initiating contacts than we did then, with a grand total of 18 more calls for service. Make sense? Mm-hmm. That's a pretty substantial increase. It's not just a one-month change. So we're trying to understand what's driving that. So James Hadley did this work for us. These are the three or four top calls for service. And this one's shaded because it's on the cusp of where it belongs. These are, a lot of these are street crimes that are occurring, probably by people who are living on the street. We spend daily staff hours for disputes, 27 hours a day responding to and attending to disputes, 8 hours a day dealing with trespass calls for service, 8 hours a day dealing with disorderly subjects, and about 10 hours a day handling burglary calls. That's a lot of work.
About the trespass, some of that is people who've been, say, shoplifters and trespassed out of a premise and they're back. Others are people sleeping on a business front porch.
That's the first one. More often than not, it's somebody.
I'm just noticing the amount of time spent on these trespass, 36 minutes, and that kind of squares with all the paperwork you have to do on somebody who's back in the store stealing again.
Yeah, it could be that, but I think mostly it's people calling because there's somebody
in their backyard.
In my backyard. I'm expecting to be there because it literally is. They're calls that we're sent to. We don't proactively work trespass much. At night, if we don't, there's a business that's being vandalized because of folks living up to their awnings and sort of thing. Our officers will be proactive to help with that. For the most part, we're dispatched.
I feel I've asked this question before. We have a program for businesses that they can post a letter in the window that authorizes officers to deal with trespassers.
Yeah, they send us a letter so that we know that they intend for that to happen. There's required trespass signage that they need to have up. And then the complainant doesn't need to respond if someone is found trespassing.
It doesn't really reduce the paperwork.
No.
They have to handle something.
No, it's a convenience for the property.
Yeah. Thank you.
All the burglary calls result in an officer going down.
Okay, so this is where certain calls are dispatched. Disputes in 2017 were 13% higher than in the previous year. There's 13 to 15 dispute calls every day. 9% of the total number of calls dispatched. All 6 watches spend about 45 minutes per officer per day on dispute calls. We spend 27 staff hours responding to dispute calls every day. And these are the numbers: 598 dispute calls, so 600 dispute calls since January of 14. And they're within this 36-block area that you see here. Let's see now. The two largest concentrations are 7-Eleven and Monroe Park. We have about 100 complaints there recently. And then Broadway and Hall. That's the one. Well, have you ever been to Six and Bar?
Not one.
Just a few times. Not during the
This data look any different if you were to look at it annually versus the 3-year. It doesn't change for sure. It seems like you get a lot of significant get from year to year.
This is where it happens. And so we know where to concentrate our efforts. That's why it's shown those first two counts.
Excuse me, Whitebird? Is that, again, people who've been denied service and told how to come back there because they're troublemakers?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, I'm sorry, I'm kind of scanning through this. There's a lot of folks that hang out around Whitebird. Yeah. Sure, you probably know that. And we get calls from residences and businesses in the neighborhood because of the people that are, sure, or there will be a vacant apartment and someone will live there and will move in and ask if things happen. But yeah, that's LTD, you know, it's another one. There's a public library, but they're all within a few blocks. Burglaries are a little bit looser. Like we do know that West University neighborhood is where they happen. That's been that way for 30 years, I imagine. We do a pretty good job of addressing the spikes that happen when the students are out of town during regular breaks. And we know how to throw our energy at this. But the reality is that there's just a lot of unlocked doors and windows. And then 80% of burglaries are involved in locked doors and windows. Is that a number that we can use any longer? I don't want to quote that specifically, but it's a pretty high number. That's so Eugene. Well, there's just more of those in that neighborhood. You know, a lot of small, expensive things. Yep. All right. And then the staffing slide, again, this doesn't change. I mean, the number of officers that we have working every 24 hours, it is 50. That doesn't change. It's not going to once we increase the size of the department. This is the ratio of officers to calls for service. This slide is a little confusing. It isn't really that helpful. So I'm going to keep looking.
Not one of yours, Chairman?
No. Good chart. I'm just not going to try to explain it right now. So this is the question that Steve was asking earlier. The key times have had the largest increase, 24% in this area. The response times have gone up a little bit, but for priority 1 and 2 calls, the queue time has only gone up 1 minute per call. If you're the person that being assaulted in your home, that means a lot. And the response time has gone up 37 seconds.
That's an average, right?
Yes. Yeah. Those are priority 1 and 2 calls. So these are the highest emergency calls. Priority 3 calls, these are crimes in progress. Jeremy, you can correct me. We've seen a 13-minute increase in queue time, and that's the time the dispatcher's sitting there waiting for an officer to be available. And then almost a minute in response times. And then priority 4 and 5 calls, we've seen the greatest growth. 3-minute increase in queue time, and 82-minute. Excuse me, I got those backwards. 3-minute increase in response time, and 82-minute increase in queue time. So these are less urgent calls, and so these range from a response time of queue time of a few minutes to days. Sometimes people wait days for us to come out and take a burglary report. And just to give an illustration, got a really nicely prepared email from a dad whose daughter lives with a number of friends in a house near campus. The daughter was asleep and heard somebody come in and just assumed it was her roommates. Her roommates came up after that and found that the door had been kicked in and stuff stolen. So they're in a house with a broken down door, and they call police. They know that nobody, or they're confident there aren't any other suspects there any longer because the crime happened hours earlier when the daughter thought that her roommates had come in. So they called police, and it was over 12 hours later. I think that crime happened around midnight, and the officers showed up at 11 a.m. And they were very impressed with the officers, how the officer dealt with it and everything. But it was upsetting to the dad to know that his daughter was alone for 10 hours. They were alone for 10 hours in the house without us responding. So that's the experience that a lot of people have when we're retiring calls. And then what you see here is that officers are spending more time on calls, and that's what we expect them to spend all the time it takes in order to handle the call right. If we rushed through these in order to reduce that queue time, we'd be losing something else. And what we've decided, our philosophy is that when you get to a call, do it right. Take good care of the people that you're with there, and that's what they're doing. So we'll continue to monitor that. But the other thing that the practice that our watch commanders encourage is that if an officer isn't really mindful of this, they hear the radio crackling and they can see the calls on the screen. So they will rush to the next, make themselves available to go to the next call without completing their report, and then they have a whole bunch of reporting at the end of their shift that they wish they'd done earlier. So the watch commanders encourage them to get all your work done so that when you are clear, you are useful at that next call.
Okay. Yeah. So what is the protocol, or how does it determine how many officers respond to search calls? This is a horrible anecdote, so it's really a problem. Like, I was walking to the bus stop down in my neighborhood, and I counted no fewer than 7 PD cars rushing to the house that I just walked past. There didn't appear to be anything wrong. Not that means there wasn't. Yeah. I fully understand that, but I assume that there's some protocol between whether you have 1 car or 7 or something in between.
Yeah, it's more of an art than a science. I'm always impressed with the fire department because they know exactly how many engines they need.
First alarm, second alarm.
Yeah, and I was out for a walk one night with my family, and one police car after another went by, and I couldn't resist. I'm worried that one of our officers is hurt. So I called to find out what it was, and it was a takeover robbery where employees have been taken hostage. So, you're going to need all the officers you can get because you would need to contain it. And if the suspect gets out, we're going to have to save the life of the person who's been taken hostage. So, we don't know how many officers we need until we get there when it's a crime like or a call like that. But then, as soon as they learn that, okay, it's not a takeover robbery, it's a shoplifting, that it's a much less serious offense, then they'll start clearing officers. All right. Same 3 neighborhoods have the highest calls. The downtown area is witnessing a decrease in activity. We're still witnessing an increase in calls for service. This is only through August 31st, but through the winter months we definitely see an increase there. Plus University is seeing an increase of 18% of public initiated calls. So they just continue to go up. We haven't seen a decline in these 3 neighborhoods since we started tracking this. And then in Whitaker, it increased 42% of calls for service.
I keep telling everybody,
call the police.
I'm sure that's part of it, honestly, and there is more. There is just more, and it grows. There's an interesting article this last week about the growth in homelessness in West Coast communities. And there's just going to be a certain amount of criminal behavior that accompanies living on the street. Yes.
Can we go back to the downtown slide? Okay. So after this summer's focus on kind of repopulating downtown, the efforts to bring people downtown, dog ban, the efforts to make the parks happen, I was looking at the curve line of last summer compared to this coming summer. It was an interesting change where last summer it seemed to like peak up in June and then kind of decline over July and August, back to more of the mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year you had a major peak in April, May, and then a decline back to what the mean was last year in June, and then an acceleration over July and August.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any kind of inclination as to what that tells you from a law enforcement standpoint?
Yeah, I think what it means is the more officers that people see, the more confidence they have that if they call the police, there'll be someone who will deal with it. And so when they see more officers out on the sidewalk, they're more likely to call when they see something.
Yeah. Do you think that it may be a demand almost,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to an increase in, there's not necessarily an increase in crime that's happening in downtown, but people feel more confident reporting it because they think something's
Yeah, that's what I think. There's an inverted apathy factor.
Yeah.
Which I never seen.
Okay.
Thank you. That's probably a good thing. And then calls and parks has gone up a little bit in the last. Okay, I don't know if this chart was ever sorted, not sorted. The top chart shows the parks that have seen a reduction in calls for service this year. The lower chart, the parks that have had an increase in calls for service. Well, you can see the list there. MLK Park is the one that paid grants. Maury Jacobs is the Riverfront Park. Open Baker, you probably know. Sladden is the park off of Jackson. Or is that Jackson? Okay, Jackson near the river. And the Monroe has seen the most growth of those calls from those parks that have had increase in calls for service.
The Coburg had a 29% decrease.
From 14 to 17, yes. But you see that there was a 25% increase from 15 to 16, another increase from 16 to 17. Just when they're all used together.
Do you have a sense, the Charles Mulligan, the one they renovated, right? Do you have a sense of whether the redesign has, I mean, obviously there's a drop when you're renovating something under construction, but there was somewhat about that taking down the cover and then redesigning it was going to make it more visible and reduce crime there.
Well, and Sergeant Smith to answer that question for us, and I'll get back to that. I don't feel like I can. It is pretty close to downtown, and there is an effect of improving behavior around the downtown. Some of the others in the list below, I think it's probably two things. One is displacement from our downtown efforts. We tried to stay ahead of that, but Monroe just sort of got away from us. But the other is just an increase in homelessness. What happens around Monroe is that people will live in their cars, and some of the people that live in their cars behave well, and they're not an issue. Some of the people living in their cars or vans, though, are getting in fights and drinking in the park and using drugs. So that living that happens on the street when it's around the park is a dangerous situation.
Seeing that around Washington also.
Yes. Okay, and then I keep looking at this one because the City Council passed an ordinance a few years ago, the social host ordinance. There really isn't a significant change in the number of complaints we get. A lot of parking complaints in the university neighborhoods, the near neighborhoods. You see that in 2015 it was 770, 17, and 730. Those are pretty similar numbers, a little bit of improvement, but really it stayed steady. What I hear from neighbors is that the parties aren't as outrageous. So we are, it has the desired effect, it just hasn't changed that metric in a way that I hope it does.
They have a fresh crop of new students every year.
Yeah,
they got to try their stuff with the cops. Right?
The greatest effect on the numbers of complaints happened while the council was deliberating on it was in the paper. That kind of publicity is ridiculous.
You could be holding your meetings out in the neighborhood.
Okay. Close here. So crime has gone up a little bit. Person crime has gone up 16%. Property crime has stayed pretty steady. Society crimes, these are really the top three calls for service that are those types of crimes. Public disputes, fights, drinking in public, trespassing, those types of things. Okay.
We'll start keeping those first steps.
So earlier on opening comments, I talked about the first report, and I reviewed the first report, and I would just try to definitely be interested in hearing more about that and how we'll incorporate some of those findings, especially in the areas like transparency and leadership, into any strategic plan. But I was curious about the response rate, and I only have like private sector compared to.
Yeah.
It was 52%, and I don't know like what the benchmark or what the normal would be in the public sector, but it seems pretty low.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious to know like what could be done to maybe improve the response rate, some sort of incenting folks or whatever. But I do think of the people that responded, like 65% answered the open-ended questions, so that was really high.
Yeah.
And what was a nice takeaway from there was how they answered the open-ended questions was pretty consistent with many of the findings within the report. So there's an awareness, I guess, within the organization. So I thought that was good, but it'd be nice to see the rate, the participation rate increase. And then there were a lot of really good findings that we should strive for. So I'd like to hear more about that at some point.
Yes. So I can comment on that. Herb said they really needed to hit 50%. In order to have a valid survey, they had to hit 50%. Went a little bit over that, and they're pretty comfortable with what the findings are telling us. And what the survey showed is consistent with what they heard in interviews, so it seems to be validated in that way. And there is sort of a survey fatigue going on here because we kept studying the heck out of the department over the last couple of years. And ESCI, and then HERB, and then internal conversations we're having, and the strategic plan, all those involved a lot of surveying. And so that's one reason I think why that numbers are lower than you'd like it to be. The other is that the primary goal of the climate anonymous electronic survey was to get at the situation for minorities, women, and non-smart. So it's not going to hit at the largest, it's not going to be an exciting topic for the largest group of people who work here, and so they're not going to be as inclined to choose to participate in that, I'm thinking. That's not a good reason to not participate. I'm just saying, if you're picking between the 100 things you can do today, are you going to do a survey about something that isn't about me personally, or are you going to do some other work? But anyway, the good news is they say we had the level of participation we needed to have a validated survey.
Not a question, but a comment. Congratulations on your new career choice. And I trust I speak for everyone at the table. It's really gratifying to see you're just going to keep on serving the people of Eugene. Got to worry about that.
You might just retire and enjoy your life.
Yeah. Well, I will.
You did say something in your report that I had not heard before, and that is the phrase interim chief, other than yourself. Can you tell us more about that? Did I miss that at the last meeting?
No, the city manager wanted to speak with the senior staff team before he identified an interim chief. He's done that. What he has spoken with the senior staff team. He doesn't want to, these are his thoughts. So he doesn't want to select someone who's interested in the permanent job and won't be someone who plans to fly. Yeah, he wants to make sure that it's a seasoned police chief, not someone who's experiencing all this stuff in the first time and can't figure out how to do it. So those are basically the two things he's looking for. And we'll probably know before too long.
Have they choose to fill? So I like permanent chief.
Anybody else have any questions for the chief? So that brings us to the end. Okay, table, we might end half an hour early. Unless somebody wants to bring up the commissioner's comments for 30 minutes. So with that, we'll go on the table for closing comments. We'll pick on you again as quick as it starts out.
I'm going to sit over there next meeting, just to throw you off. Really, the only comment I have to say is it's kind of nice to be back in the saddle. I've missed you all, and it's been working more than I have for a few months. One thing I have to say is if, in the interest of saving trees or dinosaurs or something, if anyone's interested in carpooling from South Eugene, the changes in my health would make that helpful, so let me know if you're doing that. That's about it. Thank you.
I'm just happy to be back. I missed a couple of meetings over the summer and things, all this exceedingly busy time. Really hoping to I'm not sure if you've heard about it. And there's been less travel than I paid this month. So I had called this invite and looking to recruit and it's great.
I saw some of those buses running and there were people there. And we were worried.
No.
Well,
nothing.
Set an update in the 15th for the public safety service profiles. 5:30 in the library.
I'd like to see anybody that can make that great. Well, just thank everybody for tonight. I think we had some really good conversations. I think we have some topics to talk about tonight. Appreciate everybody showing up.
And Jeremy for me.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's nice to have you back. It was fun, something fun. It's going to be at the Village Hall next Thursday. We're usually at Tuesday, but it's Thursday. And it's going to be at 5:30. Courthouse. I think it's pretty happy.